Hi guys, this is the second part of the push-up series. Again, this stage may not be necessary for everyone, and so you can just skip it, but I just want to give you those options just in case you need something to build up into a push-up, or of course if you just want a little bit of variation on the push-up theme. So this is moving up from the floor press. This is a bench press. I'm going to show you a few variations of this, and I'm just going to be showing you it with a dumbbell, although you can do it with a barbell, but I'll make a separate video on that. So I'm going to start with a unilateral movement, which means just one side, and this can be great variation to add a bit of core work in, just again because of that anti-rotation element. So if I get myself lying down on the bench, it's the exact same movement that we did before. We want to start up at the top this time rather than starting at the bottom. Again, my finish position is exactly the same as it was before. My hand is directly above my shoulder. But this time, the floor isn't going to stop my elbow here, and I'm going to keep going down. Notice again that my elbow is at the exact same angle that it was before, which is, if you're looking from the front, it's not coming out at a 90-degree angle here, it's coming back at a 45-degree angle. This is really important to drill in right from the beginning, because this is what it's going to look like later on when we move onto a push-up. We're not going to have our elbows flailing out here. But again, this time the floor isn't there to stop our elbow, so our elbow's going to come all the way down, and we're going to meet the dumbbell with our armpit here. Getting in. So all this really does is it allows us to go into a bigger range of motion with the exact same weight, which makes the exercise harder without adding on more weight. So lying back here, pressing all the way up. So I'm doing a unilateral movement, which allows me to add a little bit of core work in. You can have your feet up on the bench. A lot of people would be really against having your feet up on the bench, but for our purposes, it doesn't really matter. It's gonna make stabilizing a little bit harder. It's gonna mean that our core's gonna be working a little bit harder. It's just a variation, and it's fine to do. If you're trying to push the most weight that you can possibly push with a barbell, it's probably not great to have your feet up like this. But for what we're trying to do, it could be a great variation. I can progress onto a bilateral movement, so just a dumbbell in each hand. Now, the great thing about this, rather than an incline push-up, which we're going to get onto in a moment, is that I can really control the weight. I could be using 1 kilo dumbbells. You know, it can really control the weight if someone has an injury, or if someone's particularly weak, or if someone's particularly struggling with the technique. So that's the major advantage of working with dumbbells. Most people think weight training is dangerous, but when I'm working with dumbbells, I can really control the weight. When I'm doing body weight movements, I can't control the weight so easily. So that's the major advantage of using weights over just pure body weight movements. The next thing I want to say is if someone has diastasis, this movement isn't going to be particularly good for them. If they have a severe diastasis, we don't want to be getting them doing this big crunch to lie down and a big crunch to get up, especially when the weights are in the hands. That's the major disadvantage of this. If you're doing a personal training session, you may be able to get them to lie down on their side and roll onto their back, so that they're not having to do this big crunch to get up and down, and you can hand them the weight. But another variation on the movement could be this. Using the bench in a different angle, we can get the weight ready, do a hip thrust, and then from here we can do a one-sided or even two-sided bench press.
Now this isn't going to be the best variation. This isn't going to be the best variation of the movement if we want to lift the most weight, but it could be a nice way of varying things up. If someone has diastasis and that sit-up is particularly difficult for them, or not very good for them to be doing, and we get a lot more core activation and some glute activation in there as well. So it can be a nice variation. It's not the best variation for building strength, but it can be a nice variation to throw in that involves lots of body control. Once we've drilled in the hip thrust, we've drilled in the floor press, we can play around with variations like this, which can make training a little bit more interesting and add a few different elements of coordination in. But if you're really trying to build up strength, stick to exercises where you're on the floor or on a bench, on a nice stable surface, and pushing as much weight as you can safely.